What can a black or Asian student expect from university? It's long been the case that black and minority ethnic school leavers are nearly twice as likely to go to university than their white counterparts. But what sort of university are they going to? What happens after they leave? And is British higher education really the meritocratic paradise that we'd like to imagine?
The participation of black, Asian and minority ethnic students in British higher education in the last 20 years is a big success story. Compared to their numbers in the population at large, they've entered higher education in greater numbers than their white peers. But they go to the universities often in the communities in which they live, and a small number of the universities, about 30 in all, educate 60% of all black students and 36% of all Asian students. But perhaps unsurprisingly, these are not the universities that politicians mention very often.
Immigrant parents can have pretty sharp elbows in relation to supplementary schools, tutors, and wanting their kids to get ahead. Increasingly, those kids are doing really well in their A-levels. You then look at the range of universities that these students are going to, and what you're consistently seeing is that there is a profile of what was traditionally called the Russell Group universities, you might call them the more research-intensive universities, and you're not seeing these students replicated there.
Aiming Higher is a report compiled by the Runnymede Trust's Academic Forum, chaired by Claire Alexander of the University of Manchester and Jason Arday from Leeds Beckett University. It brings together leading and emerging scholars to investigate race, inequality and diversity in British higher education.
The percentage of BME students entering universities is much higher than white students. But we know from the work that Runnymede and other organisations have done that they're not doing as well. They're not getting employed at the same rates, they're not achieving the same wages and so on. So there are issues which universities, if they're going to take themselves seriously, need to be addressing.
Unless we subscribe to the idea that black people are inherently more stupid than white people, we have to say that there is something going on structurally within universities. If that's the case, then universities which are supposed to be providing a meritocratic basis for future life are actually reproducing existing inequalities and might actually be deepening them.
Education's always been seen as part of the solution to ethnic minority inequalities in Britain. And it is a solution, but we have long felt that that solution just isn't good enough.
A common approach for understanding these gaps in attainment is to assume that there simply aren't enough good black students around to make up the numbers at the Russell Group universities. But is it true?
If we look at the evidence, especially around A-level results and then offers at Russell Groups, we find that ethnic minorities, despite having equivalent A-level marks, are less likely to get accepted into Russell Group universities, including Oxbridge. So that means that attainment by itself can't explain all that gap.
A-level results are encouraging, but there are blind spots in the data, to the frustration of scholars all over the country.
University applications and admissions data isn't available for public scrutiny. Researchers like myself have looked at UCAS data in the past, but at the moment access to that data is becoming increasingly restricted, and so it's not actually possible to have a transparent view of what's going on in terms of the admissions process.
While the deficit model concentrates on individual students, many are starting to wonder if there might be something wrong with the universities themselves.
We tend to look very much at why students don't do very well. We're not looking at the systems and the institutions, and we're not looking at what we teach and why we teach in particular ways. We're kind of like dinosaurs, really. We're teaching white knowledge as if the rest of the world isn't happening.
If you go and do a social science degree, probably you will never read a black thinker. Now, as a black person, what you want to feel is that you can be invested in your study. And that means not that you just want to listen to and read black people, but that you want to feel that you are already part of the curricula that you're studying.
While the debate rages on about what gets taught, there's a more statistically worrying issue about who's doing the teaching. If you're a white male, there's a white professor for every 60 of you. If you're a black female, 4,000 of you will have to share each of the UK's 17 black female professors.
Whatever background you're from, if you see someone that looks like you and that represents what you're about and where you're from, that will always have a significant effect on how you think, how you carry yourself, and how you kind of perceive that actually I could be like that person.
Universities have been very wedded for a long time to the idea of meritocracy, that somehow if you are good enough you will get in. The thing that universities have been less keen to recognise in terms of its policies, and certainly around admissions, is that of course it's not a level playing field. People don't start from the same place. People don't have the same kind of access to the kinds of cultural knowledge that you might need to think about where you would go to university and what your degree might comprise of and what you might study and what you might go on to do with that degree.
Choosing the best university is hard enough, but how good are the institutions themselves at choosing the best candidate? There are growing calls for university staff to undergo an unconscious bias course in an attempt to untangle the hidden wiring behind the admissions process.
Everybody has unconscious biases. We make decisions in nanoseconds about things that we like, things that we don't like. Let's come back to the example of a white man, for example, was interviewing someone who he thought resembled him at a younger age. He might give subtle prompts in an interview. He might then interview a black woman, for example, who doesn't remind him of himself, and he may not necessarily give the same prompts. If you ask the interviewer afterwards, how did interviews go? He might say, well, I asked exactly the same questions, so therefore it was a fair interview.
So what can be done to put race equality on the agenda at British universities? A London-based think tank called the Equality Challenge Unit has introduced the Race Equality Charter Mark, an opportunity for universities to apply for an award to recognise their commitment to equality and diversity.
It's about creating the environment and culture change that's important. It's not a static prize that you get. In 3 years' time, we want to know whether you've progressed any further or whether we should take that star back from you because, you haven't done anything in the last 3 years. It's about deep self-analysis and evaluation of what your own issues are within your institution and what you can do to change the culture of the institution to make it inclusive to all students.
I think there's a very strong business case. The country is missing out on a huge amount of talent if it's not tapping into the resources, the ambitions, the energies and the aspirations of coming up to a fifth of its population. But I think for universities as well, it's not only a kind of business case question, it's an ethical and moral question. Universities should reflect the best in society, the best that society has to offer, and therefore they should be socially and ethnically diverse.
Britain is going to be 30% black and minority ethnic by 2051. Now's the time for universities to act.